I'll start by sharing a bit of what was my personal experience. I went to school to become a counselor, and in doing that, you explore so many different theories, approaches to how to understand the human experience, and particularly in my area of specialization, which was working with couples and with families, understanding relationships, the development of the self, and also relationships. And we were studying different theories, and then suddenly we came upon attachment theory. And having grown up um, exposed to our philosophy and the teachings of Krishna consciousness as presented by Srila Prabhupada through the Bhagavad Gita and through the Srimad Bhagavatam and other such literatures. And the word attachment was just like ding, ding, ding. Like this was always a sensitive word, growing up around a lot of, even the community slang or yeah, the different kind of little turns of phrase that we use in our community. Oh, Prabhu, don't be attached, or she's so detached, or he's so detached, and understanding that, or interpreting, let's say, I interpreted that detachment was some very desirable quality, and that attachment was a very undesirable quality. And it was very shocking actually, because learning about attachment theory, um, it's virtually the opposite. Virtually the opposite. In the case of attachment theory, as presented by John Bowlby and Marie Ainsworth, which are the kind of originators of what we now know as attachment theory, attachment is actually something really good. And of course, they're looking at from the human development side, right? They were studying children, they were studying babies, and I'll get into that in a bit. But it was interesting for me on a personal level, and I'm offering this as kind of disclosure to kind of share what my personal experience was, to see that I had a charge around the word attachment. And I feel like I might not be alone in that. I feel like the charge around the word attachment carries a lot of baggage because of how we have interpreted it historically, and also because of the nature of language. One same term can mean different things in different environments. And I think that it would be useful, at least I personally have found it useful, to try and deepen my understanding of what attachment means, particularly the integration of understanding, well, what is material attachment and what is spiritual attachment, and how does one actually inform the other, rather than being something that creates a very rigid dichotomy that in my own personal journey I found to be rather unhelpful, actually. So I wanted to just preface it by kind of laying that out there. And I can talk a little bit about Bowlby and Ainsworth. Um, Bowlby, he studied the deprivation of children who had not been exposed to maternal nourishment and maternal care, and how it affected their emotions. And Mary Ainsworth specifically, she was able to kind of delineate in terms of healthy attachment. Now, when I'm saying attachment, we're not getting into how our acharyas necessarily define attachment. This is just attachment theory as it's understood in terms of personal development, child development, what we would understand to be attachment theory, healthy attachment as presented now. And I'm making a case for why I think this could be helpful in our spiritual life. So Ainsworth, she found that 4 typical behaviors for a healthy attached child, right? A child that's healthy attached to their main caregiver, which is typically the mother, especially because of biological needs in the earliest stages of life. When we're healthy in our attachment, we can monitor and maintain some sense of emotional and physical closeness, right? So some proximity. We're aware of it, and we're also able to nourish and maintain that, right? Then let's say if there's a challenge, we're upset, we feel unsafe, we feel insecure, we're able to reach out, right? There's some sort of notion of I'm going to make some sort of expression, and that expression is hope to be met with some sort of response, right? We miss the person when we're apart. So the person's absence, the caregiver's absence or the mother's absence, is something that's noted. And we also count on that person as a secure base to go out and explore, right? So she made this definition of what a secure base is. It means that my parent or my caregiver can stay here and I can go out and explore, and I understand that reality is still anchored by this person's existence, who I am, how I understand the world, a sense of safety, and a sense of a safe haven. Means if something goes wrong while I'm exploring, I have a place to return to. She defined those: safe haven and secure base. So that safe haven, I get to return to somewhere if something should go wrong, but I have the inclination to explore, knowing that in some emotional way, in some safe way, I'm tethered to that secure base. So those were the kind of four things that she defined as, okay, a child who has healthy attachment will display these these characteristics. And there's a very famous experiment called the strange situation experiment, where, you know, a mom is playing in a monitored kind of laboratory setup playroom with her child, and, you know, they're playing, and she gets up and leaves. And then a stranger comes in, a friendly stranger. Um, and so based on that child's reactions, she was able to define different types of attachment. And sometimes the baby would react by crying when the mom would leave, and then kind of exploring a little bit, and then wishing the mom would come back, and then the stranger would come in, and the baby would kind of react with a little bit of like curiosity, but also like trepidation, let's say. And then when the parent would return, they would kind of relax and feel secure again. And those were usually the characteristics of a secure child. But what was interesting is that she also noted that some children, when the mother would leave, would not display any notion of someone having left. They would just kind of continue playing, or, you know, maybe self-soothe, but not really show any signs of distress or even any signs of that anything had changed in the environment. And when a stranger came in, they would still kind of be a bit indifferent. And then when the parent would return, they would sometimes become very angry, right? Or they would maintain that indifference. And so noting these differences in the child's behavior, and then kind of digging into, okay, what was the nature of that dyad? What was the nature of the bond between that adult parent entity and that child? She started to see that if there wasn't environments of nurturing, closeness, expression of affection, some notion of understanding reality, right? Some didactic capacity where the parent was able to kind of give the kid clues of how to explore the world and what was safe and what was not, and some clear boundaries, but also lots of embodied examples, right? Leading the way and embodying how to move around in the world. If the parent wasn't really involved and present and nurturing, then the child could react in many other ways that displayed dysfunctional attachment or detachment. And so she categorized that, and it's a very deep area of study. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I think that it can be analogous to how our society could in some way be training us, or we can interpret secure or insecure attachment, which could then color our experience of spiritual life, and especially color our experience of sharing Krishna consciousness with others. So I'll get into that a little bit, but I wanted to kind of give that basis of attachment theory. And there's a lot of interesting research that's come out of the attachment theory field. You know, they did one experiment where they had baby monkeys. Unfortunately, and to our great horror, a lot of these experiments happen on animals. So definitely not something to be condoned, but they did one experiment where they had baby monkeys, and they deprived them of food, and they deprived them of the presence of the mother. And then they set up a wire figure to look like a monkey, and one wire figure was covered with cloth, right? Some soft, warm cloth. And another wire monkey had food. And the baby monkeys overwhelmingly chose to be close to and try and snuggle to and be comforted by the wire monkey with the cloth and the food. And the whole conclusion of the experiment is that we are so wired, right? Monkeys being, you know, genetically perhaps the closest analog to what the human experience might be, you know, able to be formed in a lab and so on and so forth. it just goes to show that we are primed for affection. We are primed for attachment, even beyond our own physiological needs, or perhaps as another physiological need, right? We know there's a term called failure to thrive, which is not just that babies don't eat enough to become healthy, a healthy weight or a healthy height. It's that they actually can be deprived of affection and it puts their life at risk, right? And so that need for touch, that need for closeness, that need for proximity, that need for nurturing is it's wired into us. And so understanding how to be a spiritualist, understanding how to be a practitioner of Krishna consciousness within the human vessel as a part of the human experience, it would be entirely necessary to understand how the vessel works, how the vessel thrives, right? And also understanding that if I am this way and Krishna and his associates have human-like pastimes, right? Then it means that there must be some spiritual counterpart to the experience that I'm having here that can inform how I'm meant to do this on a transcendental plane, right? In the ultimate environment, there must be some counterpart, right? Some corresponding experience. And if I don't understand how to do it here, it makes it very difficult to understand how I would suddenly understand it on some other ultimate environment if I'm not well versed in doing it here, especially if I'm not well versed in how to do this with other Vaishnavas. So I did want to kind of highlight that a little bit and why I think this is important, how I think it can be relevant. And it's definitely an area for exploration, right? When I present on this, I don't necessarily feel like I've got, an understanding of how it all gets integrated, but I have a lot of questions and I'm finding a lot of links of like, oh, these concepts are interesting to put together, and I'm trying to find a way of how to digest this through our philosophy because it feels relevant, even if I am still exploring ways of how it's all threaded together. And that's why I think having a discussion about it is fascinating to me. And I want to continue to study this. And I think studying it in community, studying it in close sangha with others who are like-minded and who might also feel like this is relevant, it would definitely benefit my spiritual life. And I feel like it could be beneficial for our community as well. So another really interesting research conclusion that came out was something called effective dependency, which is these two researchers, Shaver and Hazan, they found that being able to turn to others for emotional support is actually a sign of psychological strength, and it can be a source of psychological strength. So not only is it something that's like a symptom of like, wow, this person is steady and this person is together, the fact that they're able to reach out for help, it's that when they reach out for help, it actually nourishes their spiritual strength. It can be a catalyst for further spiritual strength, for psychological strength. So in terms of developing resilience, we all know that this material world is a place full of challenges. It's a place full of suffering, right? Dukhalayama Shashvatam. It's a place where things are difficult. And so in that, to be able to turn for help, it's not so easy as just, needing help and asking for it. I just mentioned before that Mary Ainsworth, she found that a child who had healthy attachment was able to ask for help. But people who have unhealthy attachment, who are not able to attach properly, they actually have a really hard time asking for help. So what ends up happening is not only are they not able to display that psychological or psycho-spiritual strength, which would also be a symptom of humility, one of the foundational, if not the foundational quality in terms of Vaishnava personal development. Not only are you not able to ask for help, you're also not able to create the strength that comes from asking for help, right? And I think that one of the things that we struggle with in our community most is having an incredibly high standard set by our incredible acharyas, and then feeling like if we're not able to meet that standard, or when we're not able to meet that standard, that asking for help is not an expression of strength, it's an admission of weakness. And that admission of weakness, right? If you follow this formula, right, that asking, excuse me, asking for help is a symptom of strength and it's also a catalyst for creating future strength, then it would follow that not asking for help not only weakens us, but it's going to be further propelling us into emotional weakness, right? Because it might spiral out into shame or feelings of being unworthy feelings of alienation, not belonging, and then it starts to mess with our identity. And so this is why I think these kind of understandings of attachment theory could actually be really helpful, even just in this one aspect of learning how to ask for help and realizing if we don't attach properly in our primary relationships, we're going to have a really hard time with this. But this is a super useful skill in our spiritual life. It also builds relationship, right? Because it's building vulnerability, which is a prime ingredient in any relationship of trust, in any relationship of true intimacy. It's the ability to ask for help, the ability to express interdependence with others, which is, it's the idea of our Vaishnava community, at least in the sanghas in which we feel most identified. So one other really interesting research finding, and this, I'm not really sure how to pronounce this researcher's name, McKeownser, I want to guess. One thing that they found was that securely bonded adults were naturally more curious and more open to new information than those who did not have secure bonds, those that did not like have healthy attachment from their childhoods, right? So this means that they're more okay with ambiguity, they're able to reconcile contradiction, they're more open to new experiences, they're people who were able to wade in gray areas, right, in territories of discomfort, which is sort of the hallmark of the undoing of the ego, and it is it goes hand in hand with further understanding of our spiritual self. So I think that it becomes almost an obligation, right, to cultivate curiosity, right, to learn how to be uncomfortable, learn how to be comfortable with what is uncomfortable, right? And I know that, Padmanabha Swami, who's heading up this conference, often speaks about, this numinous area, right? This region of our psychospiritual development where we are very much in the unknown, right? The dark night of the soul. It happens when there's crisis. It happens when there's change. It happens when there's grief, when there's loss, which are all hallmark experiences of the material experience, but it's also hallmark experiences of the spiritual experience, right? As I get closer and closer to my real relationship with myself, to my real relationship with others, and my real relationship with Krishna, naturally, the false self, my false understandings, my previous paradigms are falling apart. When you study paradigms, it's not like one paradigm becomes superior to the other paradigm kind of falls away gracefully, and the new paradigm takes over. Old paradigms dying off is like a battle to the death. Because there's phenomenons that the new paradigm can explain that the old paradigm can't. So there's a grief, there's a collapse, right? There's like an entropy of the old paradigm where it's just not able to explain something new. So if new is perceived as threatening, is perceived as dangerous, that new paradigm can't take over. That new spiritual understanding can't take over. The teachings of the Gita, right? The teachings of the Acharyas, our understanding of Bhagavatam, the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, they're so radically different than our kind of conditioned, calcified experience in the material world. And if we're not able to be curious, and we're not able to cope with discomfort, and we're not able to wade in some sort of numinous gray area in a way that is survivable, then the new paradigm's not really allowed to come in. We're going to be kind of what in some Buddhist teachings they call spiritual materialism. We just layer something spiritual over what is foundationally actually material, right? It's just our conditioned self taking on this new spiritual outfit, but operating with a core of my previous conditioned understandings. So it's not all the way, it's not a complete, well integrated entrance into a new paradigm. So again, it's a case that I'm making for healthy attachment being the basis of healthy spiritual life. Because if you're bonded on a prime cellular instinctive level to understand that what is new is not necessarily dangerous, that what is curious is not a threat, that what is ambiguous doesn't mean that it's wrong. It means that there's something to be studied. It's something to be reconciled. It's something to be approached with the lenses of there must be some truth at the core of this. Then it allows us to approach spiritual understanding with a broader mind. And it also allows for a more peaceful community, because this is also how I'm approaching things in relationship. that I don't understand, that seem ambiguous to me, that seem to contradict a previous understanding, that don't fit my paradigm. So in an internal sense, this could benefit our inner world and our inner understanding of the philosophy, and our comprehension of being able to go deep into tattva and relationship with guru, understanding of shastra, so on. But in the immediate, it actually benefits us being able to encounter other Vaishnavas who are different than us in a way that is welcoming and tolerant and accepting and loving even. I think that these are prime requisites for that. So, these are, again, the reasons why I think that these are important, and why I think they are relevant in our spiritual life immediately. And I think that it's relevant on each level, the individual level, and then also kind of the societal level. So, there's certainly lots of challenges. So one quote that I really love is from this one researcher and therapist. She's pretty well known, kind of in the mainstream now. Her name is Esther Perel. And she's got this really great quote. She says, "A soulmate used to be God. People want ecstasy and wholeness and meaning and transcendence with a person. That means there is a collapse between the relational and the spiritual. We look now in relationships for things we used to look for in the realm of the divine, and that makes romantic love or familial love become a religion." And I remember reading this and thinking, wow, that's so true. We are looking in our material relationships, or people are looking in material relationships for things that only divinity can fulfill. And what this makes me think, especially that last line, that makes romantic love become a religion, it reminds me of the conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita, right? Sarva dharma parityaja memekam sharanam vraja, renouncing all other forms of religion and surrendering only unto Krishna. So this is kind of where I started to reconcile, like, how does this attachment theory and attachment understanding and the research, how does it match up with our philosophy? Because in our philosophy, there's been some interpretation of, spiritual attachment means rejection of wife, rejection of family, rejection of household, rejection of friendships, rejection of having to belong in community, because I'm here focusing on my spiritual life. I've surrendered to Krishna. And so that means that all of this, and that's never felt right. And I don't think that it's produced a functional, harmonious, um, well integrated society of Vaishnavas. I think that it's created schism internally within a person, because we're not wired for that even, and then also communally in terms of our relationships. And when I read this quote and I thought of Sarvadharma Parityaja, I was thinking, that's what it is. It's basically shifting our understanding and saying, these relationships, our home relationships, our friendships, our community relationships, our seva relationships, our work relationships, they're not meant to be our religion. But that's what we make it. That's what we make it because we're wired for love. We're wired for wholeness, meaning, and transcendence. It's supposed to be sourced in divinity. It's supposed to be offered to divinity. But these relationships are not excluded from that process. They're just not the source or the goal of that process. And then things kind of started to make a bit more sense, right? So I was thinking, in terms of this, there's so many other quotes that I thought were like super helpful in terms of this, even in terms of the six loving exchanges that are described in the Nectar of Instruction, right? Guhyam akyati prichati. So being able to reveal your mind in confidence to another devotee, and realizing that that's one of the primary ways in which we exchange love, and in that we grow healthy, loving relationships. I don't think that I would be inclined to share vulnerably with another devotee the innermost revelations of my heart, where I am in terms of my relationship with Krishna, my understanding of the philosophy, my wanting to clarify misconceptions, or wanting to share some of my struggles or my challenges, or perhaps even sharing my like highest aspirations and like my visions of my spiritual self and who I could be, and how I can serve in this life. And I don't think I don't really feel like I would be inclined to share that unless I felt properly bonded, securely bonded to that other Vaishnava. And so if I have a history of relationships where bonds were not made secure, where I didn't, on a cellular, gut, instinctive, intuitive level, know that it was safe to be in relationship with other people, I don't see how that would manifest. I don't see how that would happen. And I don't see how I would be able to receive another person's vulnerability either. I could see how someone else sharing their heart with me and their innermost kind of spiritual revelations with me would actually make me feel very uncomfortable if I didn't have secure bonds, if I wasn't safely attached, if I didn't understand that relationships were a place of healthy exploration and were also the base from which I can explore the world and be healthy away from that secure base as well. And this is something that I think could be really helpful, as we're creating these sanghas where we're relating with like-minded Vaishnavas. It could be really helpful to look into our own past, right? Just in this one lifetime. We don't even have so much information about previous lifetimes and how that may be generating some impact in our present situation. But even in this one lifetime, kind of looking back and saying, wow, maybe I didn't learn how to have a healthy attachment. Maybe I didn't have the nurturing in my, original upbringing that helped me understand how to relate to another person in a securely bonded way, in a safe way, in a way that transmitted safety and the welcoming of, really inner sharing inner revelation, and that also didn't kind of allow me to reveal myself properly. I know that a lot of people, they say the different types of spiritualists who approach Krishna consciousness, one of them is a person who's in distress. And many people who are distressed because of their upbringing, right? Trauma is like extremely commonplace nowadays. Always, I would say trauma's been common. But, as Kali Yuga progresses, the collapse of families, the collapse of, introspection, a contemplative life being like almost a fantasy for most people, it's almost inevitable that we experience trauma. And if that's where we're coming from, and we are taking shelter of Krishna consciousness, arriving in Krishna consciousness and now having these spiritual tools and the spiritual technology also means that we can take a look inside and see, well, what of that I have brought from my upbringing or that I have brought from my, my life up until now might be hindering my progress in Krishna consciousness, might be creating roadblocks between myself and other Vaishnavas, myself and my guru, myself and my seva, or myself and expressing Krishna consciousness and sharing Krishna consciousness when I go out in the world, right? So I think that, it's important to do this work. And I'll give you some idea of what a securely attached spiritualist might look like, right? For example, one hallmark of a securely attached person is that they have a knack for creating win-win situations, right? Situations where rather than saying it's a win-lose situation, it's your way or my way, it's your understanding of this concept or my understanding of this concept, it's karmis versus devotees, it's, gurus versus the layperson, congregation member, it's basically saying, no, what's a win-win? What's a way in which your understanding, right, your perspective, your point of view in practicing and living a Krishna conscious life can be harmonious with the way that I see it, can be harmonious with the way this other Vaishnava sees it, can be harmonious with the way this other spiritual practitioner who doesn't identify as a Vaishnava sees things. And so I think that this comes to kind of exemplify what an Uttam Adhikari might see in terms of they don't see anyone as not being Krishna conscious. They don't see anyone as being separate. They don't see anyone as being different, right? There's no xeno, right? There's no otherness in the sense of all people are seen as equal in terms of value and then also in terms of carrying out Krishna's will and Krishna's plan. That's the ultimate win-win situation. It means that everybody's on their journey. Krishna's a part of everybody's journey and we're all part of each other's journey. And they see no higher, lower, enemy, friend. There's the close, further. They're a best friend to all, right? And so that's the ultimate secure attachment. That's the ultimate win-win situation. So I could see how having a psychosocial makeup where that's already something that you're practicing, going hand in hand with your own personal development of Krishna consciousness with the spiritual technologies that we've been given by our acharyas, would create such a wholesome person. It would create a person that's integrated, right, in the way that they walk in the world and then also the way in which they're developing their spirit, inner spiritual life. right? Another hallmark of a securely attached person is that they repair properly. So when there is conflict, which is, again, it's the nature of cohabiting with other people, it's the nature of living in the world, of living in community, of serving with others, of just being materially embodied. When there is conflict, when there is trouble, they are able to generate repair, right? So an example of that might be, we should have a conversation. We should have an ishtagosti. We should we should have an intervention. We should talk to somebody, right? I should ask for feedback. I'm struggling with something. These are all attempts to repair. When you approach someone and you say, I'm having a really hard time with this and I really would love to get your perspective, that is an attempt at repair. It could be an attempt to repair internally. It could also be an attempt to repair a relationship, is to ask feedback and to express that you're struggling with something or that you can identify an issue, right? When we talk about repairs, they're very simple, but they're actually very difficult sometimes, especially if we have insecure or unhealthy attachment. We're not properly bonded. These can feel like an alien language, right? In an attempt to protect our egos, in an attempt to not rock our boat, even in terms of spiritual philosophy, we might attempt at all costs to avoid feedback and to insulate ourselves from other people's differing opinions. And if there's a conflict, to just cut off because I'm cutting the knot of attachment and I'm, you know, all of these things could easily be weaponized, right? This is, I think, the risk, is to weaponize our spiritual teachings, which are so precious and are supposed to soften the heart and meld together these precious Vaishnava relationships, could easily be weaponized to actually create distance and to create rigidity in the way that we interact with other Vaishnavas. So creating repairs is actually a hallmark of a healthy practitioner of any, personal development, but especially a deep inner spiritual life. It's an expression of humility. It's an expression of compassion, right? Of understanding that everybody's going to be suffering, everybody's going to make mistakes. And it's also a willingness to not let these difficulties in relationships become an impediment in my spiritual life, because it becomes sort of like a rock in your shoe. It's something that is going to constantly be anchoring you to your material identity, because ultimately the source of that conflict or that source of that difficulty may very well be rooted in our material identity. So it keeps me anchored there, it keeps me rooted there, right? But if I really have an understanding of my spiritual identity, which is why, attachment theory in and of itself is beautiful, but it doesn't really make sense in terms of Vaishnavas, progressive Vaishnavas, if the Vishnu, if the Vaishnava part is not the actual foundation of it. Why am I doing this? Why would I want to be securely attached? Because I want to have healthy, loving relationships with other Vaishnavas, because I understand that I won't be able to melt Krishna's heart. I won't be able to have access to Krishna's soft heart if I don't have sweet, loving relationships with devotees. It's just not going to happen. Krishna himself says it. So, I think that these are important kind of hallmark qualities, right? The other thing is, people who have healthy attachments tend to be very attuned and sensitive to others' emotions and others' needs. And so, again, I have a hard time imagining how we would be able to tune into the beauty and the mystical intimacy of perceiving or sharing in devotional emotions with other devotees, if the most basic material emotions are inaccessible and we're not able to share in that world, right? If we're not able to interface in terms of just basic human emotions, I have a very difficult time seeing how we would be able to bridge into a much more vulnerable, much more delicate, much more sacred and holy space of spiritual emotions with one another. But that's necessary, right? When we talk about Gukyama Akyati Prichati, it means the most secret, right? The most intimate, the innermost level of what we're experiencing spiritually, sharing that with another Vaishnava. If those basic emotions are not tended to, it's just not an environment where it's safe enough to explore those innermost emotions, spiritual emotions. So this means also that a mature spiritualist would not just hold space for that, but would respond appropriately, right, would make themselves available, and we would be attuned. Attuned means that you're able to understand the frequency that another person's at, and you're able to meet them there. Not such that you're abandoning yourself, right? It's still rooted in authenticity and who you are, right? It's that secure base of I know who I am, I know where I've come from, I'm trying to understand myself on a spiritual level, I'm trying to develop my own relationship with Krishna. I'm not constantly bombarded by these doubts and kind of moving about in the waves and like swinging on a pendulum. That's kind of the definition of the Kanishta Adhikari, right? A person whose faith is not steady. And so their capacity to be influenced one way or the other is very easy. Their capacity is, they're very kind of like malleable, but not in a good way. They're malleable in the sense that their faith is not steady. Their faith specifically in Shastra is not very steady. So they're able to like appreciate the deities. They have like some appreciation for like maybe other devotees, but only devotees that kind of align exactly how they think that things should be according to their like beginner or very limited understanding. There's like a lot of rigidity, right? A lot of what we see in the insecure attachment sounds a lot to me like the Kanishta Adhikari mode, which is I found something, I'm sticking to it. I don't really feel safe to explore. I don't feel safe to go outside of the very rigid structure that I've been given or that I've created. And I don't really develop closeness. I want to stay right here because there's a fear factor, right? Insecure attachment is an expression of, I don't think the environment is safe because where I was raised didn't feel secure. And so I am projecting that now into all other relationships and the environment. So analogously, if our initial or very impactful experiences as we began Krishna consciousness were giving us the impression that it was not safe to interact with other devotees. It was not safe to be vulnerable with other devotees. It was not safe to interact outside of the devotee community. It was not safe to, we weren't worthy of approaching Krishna. We weren't worthy of approaching Guru. We weren't worthy of understanding Shastra. If we weren't, for whatever reason, because we were embodied in a female form, because we identified in terms of sexuality or gender a certain way, because we were a certain age, because we were from a certain ethnic or cultural background, whatever it is. If we were somehow made to believe or had the self-understanding that we were unworthy and that the philosophy and the community did not have space for us where we were worthy of being nurtured and cared for and loved, we're going to carry that unhealthy, insecure attachment into all our other relationships, meaning how we relate to other Vaishnavas, how we relate to institution, how we relate to Guru, how we relate to our spouse and to our children, and how we preach, right? So one of the things that I think is most interesting is that because we have a preaching aspect that is extremely important in our philosophy, right? Preaching in terms of, I genuinely have found what I think is going to connect people to their divine source, right? Is going to give us the ultimate goal of life. Excuse me, helps us fulfill Sanatan Dharma, right? The Dharma for everyone at all time, everywhere, always, right? The Dharma of the soul is to connect to Krishna, to be a servant of Radha Krishna and a servant of the Vaishnavas. If I've really found that and I'm overflowing with such joy and such relief that what I want to do is share this with everybody because it's just so incredible and I want others to be peaceful and happy and connected to Radha Krishna. If that's a prime element in our philosophy and in our practice of Krishna consciousness, but I have this instinctive feeling that it's not safe, that I'm unworthy, and that there's not any relationship meant to be there. I'm just supposed to kind of just throw the information out there, and if you caught it, you caught it, and if you didn't, then there's so many more lifetimes waiting for you. And then it's actually not, I don't think it's going to land. I don't think that it's going to land. And I think that's why a personality like Srila Prabhupada had such a powerful impact, because there was a notion that there was proper, deep, spiritual bonding that was happening at the core of how he interacted with everyone. That's the Uttama Adhikari platform, which is it's not in theory that they only experience, seeing another as being dearmost. They actually live it. It's a palpable, it's something you're able to feel in relationship with them. And one of the things about attachment theory is that they say, okay, in your upbringing, maybe it wasn't done right, or you had trauma, or there was some, catastrophe, some disaster, some loss, some, whatever. So many things that can happen in our lives in this material world. And you weren't able to create a secure attachment. So what? Are you doomed now for life? Are we all doomed? Of course not. So what they develop later on, and this is, attachment theory focused, therapies and stuff are all based around this, is the relationships that we're in now are meant to be the field in which we heal those attachment injuries. The ways in which we haven't bonded properly, now we get to do it right. But what's going to happen is it's going to trigger all of the ways in which we have fractures or injuries to the attachment process. And by bringing those injuries to life, now we get to heal them. Now, you could heal them materially, and there's so many techniques and so many, therapies and, people who are trained to help you through it. And if what you're looking to do is just kind of patch up material relationships, there's a way to do that. But the case that I'm making is that there's a way in which you can integrate all of that into your Krishna consciousness. And it's not just into your Krishna consciousness so that all these material relationships can be pacified. It's actually because these relationships in which we are embedded are meant to be an offering to Krishna. It's meant to be an offering to Krishna. We can offer to Krishna, just like we've cooked a beautiful meal and we've done everything properly. We've followed certain steps and cooked at a certain temperature and with certain ingredients. And it's been thoughtful and we make it beautiful and then the presentation looks nice and we put it on a plate, just like we put all of that intention into prasadam, right? What will then become prasadam, to offering to Krishna. We can do the same thing with our relationships. What if I offered to Krishna healthy, well thought out, properly cared for, deep, meaningful, God-centered relationships where I cared for other people properly with like the right understanding of all the necessary ingredients, the right temperature, the right kind of cooperation between all the elements, the proper roles, the ways in which I'm meant to serve, right? What if I offered that to Krishna? What might Krishna like more than us offering beautiful, healthy relationships to him, for him, and then also knowing that I get to develop my spiritual self within those relationships. Those become containers where I get to develop. I've given other talks on the same topic of there are certain qualities that kind of only develop in us when we're in relationship with other people. So if those are the containers where I'm meant to develop those qualities like humility and compassion, forgiveness, softness of heart, determination, giving these relationships a chance not only to be purified and then offered to Krishna, but also that I'm able to purify myself thanks to these relationships and offer myself to Krishna, right? So there's a really beautiful verse from Bhagavatam, and the translation says, "Every learned man knows very well that attachment for the material is the greatest entanglement of the spirit, soul." Excuse me. But that same attachment, when applied to the self-realized devotees, opens the door of liberation. So that same attachment that I'm naturally wired for because of my material conditioning, for spouse and kids and job and friendships and being known in the community and being recognized at my work and whatever, if I apply that same attachment, right, which is just entangling me and further calcifying my material identity, attachment to my material self, right, that same attachment, if I'm able to transfer it to the devotees, it's not that I'm doing away with the attachment, it's that I'm consciously choosing to put this attachment somewhere where it belongs. And it's not enough to just say, oh, I have affection for these devotees. It means that now the work of attachment, including healing my attachment wounds, comes to life and it has a purpose. This purpose is directly connected to Krishna consciousness. Krishna's at the center. So it's just kind of plugging it into that sambandha understanding of what is material nature, who am I, and who is Krishna. How do I arrange those? It's not that I do away with one of those. It's that I am naturally going to be interacting there. It's a field in which I'm working. And so how do you do it properly? And the body is a field in which I'm working. And the family is a field in which I'm working. And so I thought that was very, very helpful to kind of understand it from that perspective. And the other thing that I thought was really helpful is, there's a purport, and I was trying to find it, I couldn't find it, but there's a purport where Srila Prabhupada talks about how Arjuna, he was basically looking to falsely renounce the battlefield, right? He was looking to escape from his obligation of fighting, because he thought that by cutting off that attachment, by removing himself even physically and kind of returning to the forest and just, being a yogi, that would actually be the most appropriate. It would actually be the highest good. But Prabhupada says that that's actually an expression of his attachment to his family. It's not an expression of detachment. It's an expression of attachment, because it's still based on him as a leader and the family as the family and his martial teacher as his teacher and this person. So it's still anchored in those material identities. And he said that still Arjuna had to fight. Still he had to wear armor. Still Krishna was on the battlefield. Still they were on the chariot. Still they were confronted with all these people. But his psychology had shifted. His paradigm had shifted. Now he's doing it because he's following Krishna's instruction to do it. So he's carrying out all the same orders. But now he's not doing it from the material identity of I'm Arjuna, I'm a warrior, I'm supposed to inherit this kingdom, the things that were done wrong are not okay. And it's not from that perspective. And it's also not from the perspective of, what he might think was detachment, but was actually attachment, which is I'm going to the forest, I can't do this, how could I betray? And then what's going to happen to the women? What happens to the kids and the future generation? And how am I going to enjoy this kingdom? If it's like the fruits of all this, murder, basically. So Prabhupada was saying in the purport, I wish I had found the verse of where, but he was saying in the purport, that's also attachment. The actual detachment is to say, I'm doing this for Krishna. And because I'm doing it for Krishna, then that's actually what detachment is. Detachment means I'm not doing it for myself in pro or against this relationship. I'm doing it as an offering. So, this is the case that I'm making, and I think that it could be a really interesting area for exploration. I think it could be a really interesting field for devotees, especially progressive Vaishnavas, to, see kind of where we're at. Where am I in terms of really offering up relationships as not only a way of purifying myself, but also learning how to care for others as a way of expressing to Krishna that I care for Krishna, that I care for Radha Krishna, because there's nothing more dear to them than other Vaishnavas, right? And so I think that is, it's fascinating to me. I'll say that. It's fascinating to me, and I know that it's extremely challenging, and I know that it's also an area that needs a lot of work in our Vaishnava community and our Vaishnava family. I think that there's a lot of room for growth, and I also have many questions still around this area, which is why I thought it a pertinent topic to bring to the discussion. I hope that it continues to be a discussion. I hope these are just kind of seeds of insight and thought that may be planted to further learn, how are we meant to properly attach in a spiritual sense, in a psycho-spiritual sense, for the benefit of our spiritual lives and also for the benefit of our spiritual relationships. So that's kind of what I have, and I'm wondering if maybe, I don't know, Katie, if you want to, I don't know if there's any questions. I don't have access to any chats or anything, so yeah.
I am not seeing any questions either. Just checking Facebook.
Okay.
That was wonderful, Dhanya. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
sharing everything. I'll share that attachment theory has also been extremely instrumental for my personal development and healing, and it continues to be so. So I really, really appreciate everything that you shared and your perspectives. It was enlightening, inspiring, stimulating.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful topic, and I think it's very, very relevant.
Thank you. Well, if there's no further questions, then I just want to close with this one really beautiful purport that I did check out recently, and it's from Bhagavatam 1:842, and the translation of the verse is, O Lord of Madhu, as the Ganges forever flows to the sea without hindrance, let my attraction be constantly drawn unto you without being diverted to anyone else. So this is part of the prayers of Queen Kunti. And in the purport, I found a few excerpts that I thought were so relevant. And so maybe I'll just offer this as a conclusion. Srila Prabhupada says, perfection of pure devotional service is attained when all attention is diverted towards the transcendental loving service of the Lord. To cut off the tie of all other affections does not mean complete negation of the finer elements like affection for someone else. This is not possible. A living being, whoever he may be, must have this feeling of affection for others because this is a symptom of life. The symptoms of life, such as desire, anger, hankerings, etc., cannot be annihilated. Only the objective has to be changed. Desire cannot be negated, but in devotional service, the desire is changed only for the service of the Lord in place of the desire for sense gratification. So the so-called affection for family, society, country, etc. consists of different phases of sense gratification. When this desire is changed for the satisfaction of the Lord, it is called devotional service. I thought that was really beautiful. So further in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, the fighting was there, the friendship was there, Arjuna was there, and Krishna was there, but Arjuna became a different person by devotional service. Therefore, the prayers of Kunti also indicate the same categorical change in activities. Srimati Kunti wanted to serve the Lord without diversion, and that was her prayer. This unalloyed devotion is the ultimate goal of life. Our attention is usually diverted to the service of something which is non-godly or not in the program of the Lord. When the program is changed into the service of the Lord, that is to say, when the senses are purified in relation with the service of the Lord, it is called pure and unalloyed devotional service. Right? Her affection for the Pandavas and the Vrishnis is not out of the range of devotional service, because the service of the Lord and the service of the devotees are identical. Sometimes service to the devotee is more valuable than service to the Lord. But here the affection of Kunti Devi for the Pandavas and the Vrishnis was due to family relation. This tie of affection in terms of material relation is a relation of Maya, because the relations of the body or the mind are due to the influence of the external energy. Relations of the soul, established in relation with the Supreme Soul, are factual relationships. When Kunti Devi wanted to cut off the family relation, she meant to cut off the relation of the skin. The skin relation is the cause of material bondage, but the relation of the soul is the cause of freedom. The relation of the soul to the soul can be established by the via medium of the relation with Super Soul. Seeing in the darkness is not seeing, but seeing by the light of the sun means to see the sun and everything else which was unseen in the darkness. That is the way of devotional service. So I just thought that was such a beautiful excerpt, because it basically means we are charged with the responsibility of developing healthy relationships based on not just our relationship soul to soul, but also soul to super soul, which I think is a really beautiful integration of what could be maybe our sadhana or our inner bhajan and also our sangha, right? And then allowing the externals of the relationship to fall away based on that inner development and that soul to soul development. So I just wanted to conclude with that, because I think, yeah, it was perfectly, beautifully elucidated by Srila Prabhupada.
Thank you so much, Dhanya.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for listening, for participating. There is one more presentation still in the conference. It is at 2 p.m. Eastern time with Pracharananda Das. So please listen in if you are able. Thank you, everyone.